Hey PV, my name is Delisha Drain, a fellow honor student, and today I wanted to share with you guys a very interesting website that you as a Prairie View faculty or staff member have free and easy access to. And this website is called the HistoryMakers. Now, what is the HistoryMakers, you might ask? This is one of the largest collections of African American experience through biography and video interviews. And these interviews are given for you to see a face-to-face encounter of the person that you are researching, so it feels very raw and authentic, the information that you're getting to really understand the person that you're kind of hearing about. And this website has been around since the 2000s, but the history that they pull from is dated back to 1980s, getting information from even before then that can be used for research, exploration, experimentation, or just for personal use, but it's limitless. But this is actually very important for today because the HistoryMakers is one of the only websites, or it is the only website that has the large-scale collection of the Black experience, and that's since the WPA slave narratives. There has not been a collection of Black experience since the slave narratives, and that says a lot because those slave narratives couple years back, but the HistoryMakers attempts to bridge the gap between African American history from then and now, and they do that with a plethora of stories on the lives of many history makers. But what exactly, or who exactly, is a history maker? A history maker, I'm glad you asked, is an African American by descent who has made some major or minor accomplishment in some way that changed the course of history or just made an impact on the world. And these are large-scale impacts, small-scale impacts. That's why in the History Maker website you can see a range of different people. There are famous and not so famous people there. There's Barack Obama, Whoopi Goldberg. There is a variety of people. There's so many people. Angela Davis. There's sung stories and unsung stories that you can find by browsing through the History Makers. So it's very important to go through all these things because the main stories of famous people you already know. Most of their story has been told, but the ones who are do significant things but are not given as much of the limelight that they deserve, the History Makers offers that for them. And as you know, Prairie View produces productive people, so of course there are PV History Makers. Although there is not as much as I would like, the History Maker program is boosting their interviews and putting more roots in places outside of their headquarters so that they can get more stories out there when there's already hundreds, thousands of stories. But of course you can always do more, and they're updating daily. But with the 11 history makers that are on PV, they tell the stories of those who have either worked within the university or attended the university and left an impact in some way. For example, these are 6 of them, which may look familiar to you as an honors student because there is a handful of honors students who are working on a project already using the History Makers actually to make a children's book, and I'm one of those students. So my person that I'm researching is Miss Ernie Mae Miller, and she is someone who has attended the university. She was a musician. She is what we call a music maker. There are civic makers, science makers, etc., etc., but she is a music maker who started a band and eventually went solo with nothing but her voice, piano, and saxophone. And her story went from there. She met a lot of famous people, made a name for herself, and this is what eventually got her on the History Maker website. They gave her a nice interview along with these other Prairie View icons. And yeah, so there's a lot that you can see, but their stories range from music to many other things because they have rich and diverse content. You can find nearly anything on the History Makers website. As you can see, there's things entrepreneurs, there's family life and kinship, there's feminism, there's LGBT plus, all of that. There's identity formation, race relations. It touches on public health, filmmakers, the environment I love looking at those. There's sports, there's the poetry, there's food waste, science, engineering, it goes towards all of it. You can find nearly anything, and that's what makes it so useful for people to be used in for research, for personal use. For example, I used it for personal use to look up something that most people know about, which is Aunt Jemima. I imagine you know about Aunt Jemima and her history, and that she got rebranded as the Pearl Milling Company, because of course the racial origins, the slave related and derogatory Aunt Jemima, like the history behind that caused her to lose the brand for all these very racist and very offensive depictions of African American women. But what you may not know, the unsung history behind this, is that there were people who lived during the time period of all these derogatory things that were fighting back with the Aunt Jemima Company by using it and turning it into something more beautiful and more empowering. Specifically, Jeff Donaldson. He is an art maker, and he created this piece of work right here called Aunt Jemima and the Pillsbury Doughboy in 1963. And with this piece of art, as you can see, this is Aunt Jemima, not the lady that you saw before, to make her look very offensive, very derogatory. This is how he depicts Aunt Jemima, to undermine the subordinate and submissive views that are on black womanhood, or female black women, that are on black women. He strengthens it by giving her muscle and showing that she is, even under oppression, which this person right here, this is meant to be the Pillsbury Doughboy, and he represents oppression and the police brutality during that time. It shows that even when he is trying to oppress her, her defensive stance and her fierce face show that she is not going to back down. And that is very telling of the time period. And because his belief was that even though people are trying to put us down, we will not let them. The police were being very brutal during this time, but he did not stand back, and he showed it with his art, and he really just empowered the black strength yet again. And hearing me talk about it isn't as empowering, so here's a personal video so you can hear him say it.
For example, this work here, Aunt Jemima and the Pillsbury Doughboy. I started that work the day of the March on Washington, because I, like everybody else, was very impressed with all of that pomp and circumstance and the wonderful speech by Martin Luther King. But I was very disappointed because no marching orders were given. I mean, later Mr. Elijah Muhammad, told me if he had ever had that many people listening to him, he'd never have to march again. But in any event, I knew that after that the struggle would then revert to the streets. The minions, the people who had no voice, would express themselves in a violent way because we were being treated violently. The police were brutal, even the black police. Gloves Davis and his type, Gloves Davis was the guy who was involved with the killing of Fred Hampton. Boasted of it, West Side cop. It had been infamous for years over there on the West Side. But in any event, that was the first of many Aunt Jemima paintings that were done in this country. And the notion was the minions, those with no voices, those with no stake really, who had nothing to lose, were going to rise up, and they were going to have to do battle with the forces that are put there to protect those who have from those who have not, and that's the police. So that's how that one started. But that was before Africopa. That's what you would call protest painting. We were doing propaganda. So
And there you have it. There's his take on that. And as you can see, that is just a micro story within the story of his life. And even within that micro story, he talks about Fred Hampton, which is a separate thing, a separate instance where black police beat a black man, a part of the Panthers, the Chicago Panthers, I believe is what they're called. But just all the stories within the History Makers, you can find so much just by watching one clip and really diving into the experience. And this shows that. This shows how you can find literally anything. Something so simple. The Aunt Jemima. I don't think you've ever seen Aunt Jemima look like this. Moving on. You can use all of this information actually to win some money. There is a Black History Month contest in February where you can use the History Makers and find as many stories as you want to find the history maker that most resonates with you and portray their story. And you can do this by presenting an 8 to 12 minute video, kind of like I'm doing now, and just talk about their life, talk about the history maker you chose, give a presentation, and also incorporate a creative aspect. That's the part where you can really have fun with it. You could show a history maker's accomplishments, their views, values, their favorites, or their dreams in some piece of artwork of your choice. It can be a drawing, it could be a skit, a poem, a piece of art, digital art, a sculpture. It's up to you. But keep your eyes and ears open because the contest registration opens January 16th of next year. And then the last day to submit your presentation video, your video presentation, is February 25th. And of course, there is a cash money prize. The direct amount will be released eventually, but definitely keep your eyes and ears open for this because it is coming soon. The time will fly. But just so you can so you understand how to even get to the archive, here you go. Here is step by step on how to enter into the database, the History Makers. So you just look up PVMU library and take yourself to the databases A to Z, which will then take you to the alphabetized database. Click on H because History Maker starts with H. And then there you go, History Makers Digital Archive. And once you click on that, voila, you have access to all you need for this personal use, for the contest that is coming up, and for anything, for research. Just completely have fun with it. The floor is yours. And yeah, that is the History Makers website. I hope you enjoyed. And as always, stay safe. Have a good one.